Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Okay, hey guys, Byzantine time. So we did the first, I'm guessing it was the rise, excuse me, of the Byzantine, and then the Golden Age, and then the fall. After at the end of the first one was, it spelled out a very bleak next video, but I mean, that was called the Golden Age, so you knew they rebounded somehow, but the way the Byzantine Empire has impressed me, I guess, so far, is simply by surviving rather than by doing any great feat of, conquering some land they never had before. But just the fact that they're just kind of holding off extinction until the end, I think that's the situation they seem to be in, and they seem to be holding off pretty well with what they have, the situation they're given. So let's go. Next episode, final one, I believe, 3 out of 3. Fall of the Byzantine Empire, history summarized, overly sarcastic productions, great channel. How you guys doing? Good? Bad good? I haven't had a great past few days, so I hope you're all doing well. Feel a lot better now, though. Let's go. Fall of the Byzantine Empire. I'm going to give it a preemptive like. Go.
While the Roman Empire in the West was getting goth-smacked into oblivion in 476 AD, the eastern half of the empire, with its capital of Constantinople, was, by comparison, doing pretty great. For one, they existed, so that's a plus, and the Byzantine Empire evolved into a gorgeous gold-coated hybrid of classical Greco-Roman and medieval Christian culture.
Great architects and engineers. Beautiful buildings. Paintings, whatnot.
But unfortunately for our biz boys, shiny mosaics and ginormous domes couldn't prevent the infinite abyss of disasters that lay.
Something just is funny about this little kid's face. I don't know what it is, sorry.
And shiny mosaics and ginormous domes couldn't prevent the infinite abyss of disasters that lay in wait over the millennium to come. Between Persians, Goths, Arabs, Turks, Normans, and the more than occasional civil war, it's safe to say that the Byzantines could not catch a break. And the latter medieval period continues this distinctly Promethean trend where
I also know, since it's the same area, and what I believe, if I had to guess, I'd probably be like a century off, or even more. If I had to guess what the end of the Byzantine Empire is, something like the 1300s or something like that, right? And so that would somewhat coincide with the rise of the Ottoman Empire, and then they must have some sort of conflicts, and then the Ottomans take over much of the land that the Byzantines have, or all of it. So I'm curious to see how that ends up.
They suffer a constant and arduous evisceration by eagle without ever actually dying from it. As we will indeed see in just a moment, our favorite golden disaster empire managed to keep on thriving and defying the specter of death despite even the most garbage of circumstances. So, to see how the Byzantine Empire procrastinated its own death and even then kind of slipped past the deadline, let's do some history. Now, this video's timeline will start, incidentally, with the fall of the empire, about 2 centuries ahead of the typical 1453. I know, we're making great time, because long before the Ottomans ever entered the picture, the Byzantines were struggling to coexist with the Italian merchant empires they were growing so reliant on. Venetian and Genoese traders tussled in the Latin neighborhoods of Constantinople like they were street gangs in Shakespearean Verona, but the Byzantines poured the proverbial Greek fire on the problem by arresting and then murdering tens of thousands of Latin citizens in the city. Bad look. This giant yikes was compounded by the bad Latin neighborhoods of Constantinople they were growing so reliant on. Venetian and Genoese traders tussled in the Latin neighborhoods of Constantinople like they were street gangs in Shakespearean Verona, but the Byzantines poured the proverbial Greek fire on the problem by arresting and then murdering tens of thousands of Latin citizens in the city. Bad look. This giant yikes was compounded by the baffling ineptitude of the ruling Angelus dynasty, whose constant infighting left the empire woefully mismanaged. This got infinitely worse when the powers of Europe launched Crusade numero 4 on the promise of, this time it might actually work. To the ensuing surprise of precisely nobody, it got off to a rocky start, with their understaffed army getting excommunicated by the Pope before they even left the Adriatic Sea. But the light at the end of the Crusaders' tunnel was Prince Alexios Angelos, who offered Byzantine military support in exchange for reinstating his deposed father. So here we see the Angeloi ignoring the key rules from Alexios Komnenos' declassified crusading survival guide. Rule 1. Under any circumstances, do not ask crusaders for help. We've been through this before. It is not worth it.
They're just going to end up sacking your own city.
Rule 2. If the Crusaders arrive anyway, transport your Crusaders across your empire as fast as humanly possible. Do not let them get any ideas. Rule 3. While your Crusaders are inside your empire...
I laughed. I'm not sure if it was this one, but I think it was the last episode where it said Deus does not volt.
Never, under any circumstances, provoke your Crusaders. They are armed, violent, and prone to fits of disproportionate rage. Yet, in 1204, the Angeloi failed spectacularly on every point, and spying an opportunity to quit while they were ahead, the Crusaders simply sacked Constantinople. Venice deliberately instigated the pillaging, but by this point the Byzantines really should have known better than to tee them up. So, the sack.
Hey, that looked like the same art style as one of the paintings I like to use as my background a lot. Okay.
Really should have known better than to tee them up. So, the sack. Beyond being a rough approximation of literal hell on earth for the Byzantines unfortunate enough to be on the receiving end, the Crusaders desolated the art and architecture of the city. Venetians had the good sense to steal the priceless relics of Constantinople for the glory of the Republic, instead of mindlessly burning and or murdering everything and or one. But whether trashed or taken, Constantinople still ended up ruined, and the rest of the empire was next on the to thieve list. Venice, the crafty little devils, chose to swipe off the islands of the Aegean, while the Franks installed a Latin emperor on the Byzantine throne and carved up the Greek mainland. On paper, the Byzantine Empire ends right here. The capital was now kaput, and the Aegean basin, which so long preserved the Greco-Roman world, went poof. But
okay, so it's still technically a thing, I guess, until 1460 AD, but it's really just a few states and can't really be considered an empire, so it's dead in 1204.
And the Aegean basin, which so long preserved the Greco-Roman world, went poof. But even the end of the empire couldn't shake that damn Hellenic persistence, as Byzantine nobles in survival mode quickly laid out successor states in the wake of the Crusade, in Trebizond, Nicaea, and Epirus. Each became a haven for Greeks fleeing their new Frankish overlords in mainland Greece, whose Latin empire proved to be little more than a post-Crusade money pot. But the Franks quickly got bored by the prospect of actually governing, and soon became weaker than the assorted Byzantines they had so recently stopped. Are we really surprised? The three Hellenic states started out on the defensive, to put it mildly, but some shifty strategy and good old-fashioned luck gave Nicaea a leg up. After spreading out over the western Anatolian coast and gaining a foothold in Thrace and Macedonia, the Nicaeans reconquered Constantinople kind of by accident. While a small army scouted around the city to suss out its defenses, they learned that the Frankish army was out on campaign. So the Byzantines snuck through a small break in the wall, opened a gate, and then took the city. For all the disasters to befall the Byzantines, it's only fair that the RNG just this once works out in their favor. Though Emperor Michael Paleologos soon found his work cut out for him, as the city had hardly been cleaned since the Crusade half a century earlier, and sliding so close to death's door prevented the Byzantines from cutting quite as imperial a figure as they used to. Still, it was better than the alternative. As we've seen, it was hard enough to defend the Byzantine dominion back in the good old days, but with the emperor now presiding over a kingdom and capital that were both hollow shells of their former selves, clever diplomacy was the sharpest weapon in the arsenal. Fair to say the more impressive achievement was not in retaking Constantinople, but in keeping it. As ever, the rivalry between Venice and Genoa made this difficult, as their schoolyard slap fight had a conspicuous habit of always going down in Constantinople. And, of course, there were a few strategic flubs, such as when the Byzantines hired a band of Catalan mercenaries who went rogue at the slightest provocation and claimed the Duchy of Athens for the next 7 decades. But even this wasn't the worst mercenary customer experience the Byzantines would endure, as, in 1343, the royal treasury was too thin to pay for Venetian help, so the former Empress Anna pawned what she had, which was the empire's crown jewels. So, despite selling Constantinople's royal honor, the empire's crown jewels.
Let me talk to my Byzantine crown jewels guy. I get the joke. What is that? Pawn shop?
So, despite selling Constantinople's royal honor for some warships, Anna lost her war, which, I should say, was a civil war against the empire. So, when acting Emperor John Cantacuzene and his wife Irene were officially coronated in 1347, the crowns were copies made of tinted glass, because the originals were off in Venice, like every other Byzantine artifact.
I mean, saying it's the civil war against the empire, that's true, but isn't it also teetering on full collapse, and so someone's got to do something? And so Nicaea might as...
Tinted glass, because the Coronated in 1347, the crowns were copies made of tinted glass because the originals were off in Venice, like every other Byzantine artifact. Yet, somehow, despite all that, hardly the worst thing to happen in the 1340s because, as we know, plague. Man, it does not let up. Population is ravaged, economy in ruins, let us not dally here, friends, we all know the drill, and this would provide a golden opportunity for the Ottomans over in Anatolia, who
Aha! Okay.
made it clear they were the next big Muslim power. So, about a century after the reconquest of Constantinople, there were 4 fundamental and unavoidable problems to the empire's long-term health.
I'm so ready to learn about the Ottomans, it's not even funny.
The Ottomans were gaining strength and pushing west, Venice and Genoa turned the Aegean into their personal battlefield, and the complete lack of a Byzantine economy meant they were fully dependent on those two for trade. Then, to cap it off, we've got the endless internal power struggles and succession crises.
It's so hard to read and listen at the same time.
Let's not kid ourselves, this is still the Romans we're talking about here. With worries like that, fully rebuilding the empire was a no-go, so the Byzantines picked their battles and bought their time, which meant putting themselves under the protection of the Ottomans. But, ever defiant in the face of peril, giving up was never an option. While the empire was shrinking down to just Constantinople, things looked shockingly different on the other side of the Aegean.
I love how simple of a transition that is from Byzantine to Ottoman, in that it was just like, the plague. Something had to. The plague seemed to be. It's not the straw that broke the camel's back. It's more like the log that broke the camel's back. But okay.
Right when Michael down to just Constantinople, things looked shockingly different on the other side of the Aegean. Right when Michael Palaiologos was tripping ass first into retaking Constantinople in 1261, he also had the good fortune of capturing the Latin prince of Achaia in a battle, and ransomed him back in exchange for a few castles down in the Peloponnese. They weren't much, but they were well fortified among the mountains, much like the ancient Spartans had been way back when. Over the next 2 centuries, this distant Byzantine outpost in Laconia became a prosperous corner of the Hellenic world, as Greeks from the Morea and beyond flocked into the city of Mistras to try and pick up where the empire left off. So in the 13 and 1400s, Mistras became a haven of Byzantine culture and scholarship.
I can't go on.
This Morea and beyond outpost in Laconia became a prosperous corner of the Hellenic world, as Greeks from the Morea and beyond flocked into the city of Mistras to try and pick up where the empire left off. So in the 13 and 1400s, Mistras became a haven of Byzantine culture and scholarship. And I mean, look, I'm not gonna pretend like one decently well-off corner of the Greek world is just on par with the empire pre-Crusade, because of course it's not. But I will come to bat for the Morea as a paragon of that Romano-Hellenic perseverance, to keep on trying even after everything seemed lost. No, I'm not getting sentimental, that's just marble dust in my eyes, shut up. Anyway, like with Constantinople, keeping this territory safe required a gentle diplomatic touch, but the game was a hell of a lot easier with water on this territory safe required a gentle diplomatic touch, but the game was a hell of a lot easier with water on 3 sides and mountains on the 4th. And with Constantinople sweating javelins at the sight of incoming Ottomans, it became clear that the Morea could handle itself. Constantinople sweating was a hell of a lot easier with water.
Now I get what the Spartans were on about with mountains like these. Who even needs walls?
On 3 sides and mountains on the 4th. And with Constantinople
well, definitely us, but like the point stands.
Sweating javelins at the sight of incoming Ottomans, it became clear that the Morea could handle itself, so it gained autonomy in 1349. By the early 1400s, they expanded outside Laconia into almost the entire Peloponnese and briefly had authority over Attica. The Byzantine Morea also had a practical benefit to Constantinople, as emperors in waiting got their political training as governors down in the Peloponnese, to the point where the last emperor, Constantine XI, was actually crowned in Mistras rather than up in the capital. Uh-oh, did I say last? Yeah, about that. The thing with the Ottomans is they didn't stop. Despite the empire's best efforts and the too little too late help of European crusader armies that disintegrated on impact, it was clear the show was wrapping up. By 1453, Sultan Mehmet finally had the means to take the city of Constantinople, and by means, I mean cannons the size of a house.
Whoa.
After blockading the Bosphorus and cutting off the city's line of supply, the Ottomans blasted open the Theodosian walls and poured in. Emperor Constantine is said to have given a rousing speech to his countrymen before charging into where the fighting was fiercest.
You know well, my brothers, that we have 4 obligations for which we are willing to die: our faith and piety, our homeland, our families, and the emperor anointed by the Lord. We fight not for just one obligation, but under the command of all 4.
never to be seen again. After the battle, countrymen
The speech was surely invented afterwards, so there's good.
before charging into where the fighting was fiercest, never to be seen again. After the battle, the Sultan toured the city and was so awed by the beauty of Hagia Sophia that he preserved it and converted it into a mosque rather than blasting it and starting from scratch, as was more often the move. But even after this, he said, moving the goalpost back for dramatic effect, it wasn't the end for the Byzantines. For one, the Ottomans continued the time-honored love of ultra-domed architecture, but also the Venetian Republic's outlying territories in the Aegean and Ionian Seas were majority Greek, further preserving Hellenic culture for centuries. Venetian Crete later became a beacon for art and scholarship that mixed the Italian Renaissance with traditional Hellenism. So despite the earth-shattering treachery of crusading Venetians, the painfully ironic end result is that Venice played a vital part in the long-term preservation of Byzantine culture. Man, that is uncomfortable to say out loud. And though Crete fell to the Ottomans in 1669,
You did good.
the Ionian Islands remained stubbornly non-Ottoman Ottomans in 1669. The Ionian Islands remained stubbornly non-Ottoman until they became part of modern Greece, but that is really pushing the timeline.
I mean, if we're going to get technical, then I guess.
And so, let's wrap up. The standard question of the Byzantine Empire is essentially, why didn't they die way the hell sooner when everything was always on fire? Because, on one level, yeah, the Byzantine story is over 1,000 straight years of the map getting smaller, but that time lapse would have been swift if they didn't persevere. Let's not forget they had over 1,000 years. By some metrics, that's the longest empire, and it got that.
The Tamil Kings, I recognize that from... Who are the Tamil Kings? I don't know. They have spices or something. From that Bill Wirtz video? Okay, sorry.
That far because at no point in Byzantine history was it the
Byzantine Empire from Constantine in 330 to the fall in 1453 is 1,123 years. Even calling it in 1204 makes it 8 centuries. If we start counting from Augustus back in 27 BC, we get a grand total of 15 centuries. That's quite a run.
The longest empire, and it got that far because at no point in
Augustus
Byzantine
is
history
pretty cool.
was it too late to care or too late to try, because they believed that they had something about their state, their people, their faith, and their identity that was worth living for and dying for.
To be honest, I don't think it's that confusing. I think that the want of conquering them did not meet the ability to conquer them. I think it's as simple as that. And, you know, with their sort of position, I guess it would be, you might really want, sure, you might really want it, but who really had the power to do so? I know that might be oversimplifying it, but it's not anticlimactic because you knew what was going to happen. And so you can't be disappointed when you know they're just kind of clinging on by their fingernails. But clinging on by their fingernails, they did well. And I'm not that surprised they hung on for so long after learning about it.
And even when the last mini golden age was a distant memory, that tireless determination to do their best kept them going in even the most dire circumstances to create the next mini golden age. So when we look back at the empire to ask why the Byzantines kept going after Rome falls in 476, it's for the same reason as when Constantinople fell in 1204, but those Byzantines kept going. Thank you so much for watching. This video was an absolute joy to make, even though I had to...
It was a joy to watch. Assassin's Creed.
Well,
awesome. That was a great series and taught me a lot about something I knew very little about. Yeah, awesome. That was great. I'm going to do the next World War I country episode next. I'm not exactly sure which country it is, but I will be doing that. Hope you're all doing well. That was enjoyable. Really nice. Keep recommending. Do all the things. Hit all the buttons. See you next time.